Welcome to the Flying Octopus podcast, offering a new perspective on Red Wings hockey, as well as all the important news from around the NHL. And now, here are your hosts, Tony Wolak, Devin Little, and Evan Sabourin.
Welcome into the Flying Octopus, episode 3. I am your co-host, Devin Little, joined by Thing 1 and Thing 2 over there, Evan Sabourin and Tony Wolak with their matching shirts. I did not get the memo, but hey, purple for the octopus, right? Gentlemen, as much as it is episode 3, I feel like this is almost our first legitimate episode because we've got some stuff to talk about, don't we? And let's be honest. Let's kind of just jump right into it. Red Wings fans have been waiting for these pieces of news literally all summer. So I'm not going to make them wait too long for us to get into it in this show. Let's jump right in. 3 big contracts dropped. 2 bigger than one of them, but hey, the Red Wings don't have any offseason to take care of anymore. Jonathan Berggren, Lucas Raymond, and Moritz Seider all have new deals. They are officially locked in as Red Wings for the 2024-25 season. We'll take a look at them one by one. And in my opinion, we'll start low, and we'll start talking about Jonathan Berggren, who signed a 1-year deal at $825,000. Obviously did not spend nearly as much time in Detroit as maybe people would have thought he would have last season. I know I didn't expect him to spend most of the season in Grand Rapids. But he's looked really good in the AHL, and he's kind of at that point now where it's time to be an NHLer. He's obviously no longer waiver exempt. Tony, you are our contract extraordinaire here, and we'll get into that a little bit later as well. But I don't know what for me personally, this deal just makes a lot of sense. It's a 1-year kind of prove it deal. What are you seeing on your end on this Berggren deal?
I don't know, more or less the same, right? This is what Joe Veleno did last summer. For Berggren, he only got into 12 games with the Red Wings last year. 6 points in those 12 games, pretty solid. But spent most of the year in the American Hockey League, putting up a point per game. But when it came down to his contract, really only the NHL stats mattered. And the fact that he only got into 12 games didn't really give him a whole bunch of leverage when negotiating with the Red Wings. So, yeah, why not? He's going to be with the team full time this year, and might as well go on a 1-year contract that, will parlay possibly into a much bigger contract next summer. He'll be a restricted free agent again. Can go to arbitration if he wants, or if the Red Wings want. And it's on him now. He's a big leaguer, and it's time for him to earn his keep. And I'm kind of excited to see him with the Red Wings full time. Devin, you saw a bunch of his action in Grand Rapids last year. Did you feel like he was, he was like in charge there? He was a driver there, and like one of the best players on the ice, like fully deserving of an NHL roster spot this coming season. What was your perspective, just based on what you saw last year? Was he ready to graduate, during the season if there was an open roster spot?
Every time I went and saw the Griffins play, there were 2 players that stood out to me on a regular basis. One of them was Simon Edvinsson, for all the reasons why we're all excited about him being a full-time NHLer this season. And obviously he's huge as well, so it's hard to miss him. But also Berggren. Berggren was very much the Griffins' best forward. The numbers show that, and it showed on the ice as well. I think more so than any other Griffins forward, really, he carried and moved the puck with confidence. I think that the team knew he was at least their most potent offensive weapon, and so the puck tended to go his way a lot. But that's what happens when you're a good player. The puck tends to find you, right? I'm very much of the belief that Berggren doesn't have anything left to prove in the AHL. If he was stuck there again, I just feel bad for him because there's nothing else he can really prove. He holds the Griffins' rookie scoring record from 2 seasons ago when he was a rookie in the AHL. And then he just built on that and had a really dominant season as the Griffins' best forward this past season. He's ready. Evan, I have a question for you because I know episode 1, I think you even mentioned it. Berggren doesn't, where he's projected to be in the lineup, he's not really a great fit. And obviously, there's always been that chatter about whether or not he wants to be with the organization or if the organization wants him, if this is destined for a long-term marriage between the two parties. And you've kind of been of the opinion that a trade is coming or something's going to happen on that end. Are you still of that mind now that this deal is signed and Berggren's a Red Wing for the time being?
Well, first off, thank you for putting me on the spot right away. No, I mean, Johnny Berger's, he got the prove it 1-year deal, and heading into camp, I think they're going to give him a shot to prove it this year. And, I might have been wrong. You never know. Anything can happen between now and the start of the season. So don't be surprised, but I'm not leaning that way as much as I used to. So, it's a good 1-year deal. I think he deserves it. I mean, he has no other options with the Red Wings since he can't be sent back down to the AHL. There's no chance that he would ever clear waivers. So I think, this training camp is probably going to be one of the biggest auditions of his life. And there's going to be competition. And we all know that there's going to be competition. We've got prospects that are fighting for spots, and if they can make a case in training camp, then maybe there is a room for a deal. The Red Wings situation is still it still seems unsettled to me because there's a lot of spots. There's not a lot of spots, but there's a lot of players that are going to be fighting for those spots. So it'll be interesting once training camp hits. You're looking at Marco Kasper, we're looking at Carter Mazur, even Nate Danielson. Can these guys beat out Berggren for a roster spot? And Berggren's contract is not something that's going to be, hard to move. If someone beats him out for a spot, because he won't go back to the AHL, they'll have to trade him. So I'm excited to see what he can do. I think he's earned that spot in the Red Wings lineup. We don't know what goes on behind the scenes and what has happened these past 2 years. With him in management, we only hear secondhand stories about what could be and what could not be. But there's no denying that Berggren had a great year for the Grand Rapids Griffins, and he was a leader, and he really proved it up in the playoffs too in the AHL. So I'm looking forward to seeing these training camp battles. I mean, that's the number one thing I'm watching for in training camp is to see who's going to battle it out and who's going to beat who. And at the end of the day, as an organization, this is exactly what you want to have in training camp. You want someone to force your hand. So if Berggren plays up to his capabilities, which I think he can, I could definitely see him starting the season on the third line. But again, this is why it's sports and training camp. This is why training camps happen. If he gets beat out, then we could see something else happen.
It's interesting just how the forward lineup is constructed, right? So the top 6 is kind of spoken for with the players there. And then, last year the Red Wings had their matchup lineup, Michael Rasmussen, Andrew Kopp, and Christian Fischer. And they already said that they're going to keep a shutdown line again. So that would leave Berggren with Joe Veleno and Tyler Mott, which is something we've been talking about since free agency started. And then opening day of training camp, those 3 are paired together. So with Berggren, he's going to be starting out on the 4th line unless there's an injury, more than likely. And I kind of hesitate to call it a 4th line. It's kind of a specialist line because with Berggren and possibly Veleno, there could be power play time, and then Veleno and Mott on the penalty kill as well. So it's not like the traditional 4th line where you play 6 minutes a night and just kind of go out there every so often to give the other guys a rest. But I don't know, for Berggren, I am curious to see how that plays out with that role between that sort of 4th line role, jumping up if there's an injury, and then power play 2. I have him actually having a pretty decent season with my scoring model that I have in 74 games, putting up 18 goals, 26 assists, and 44 points. Based on everything we've seen from him, he definitely has the capability to kind of step into that Daniel Sprong role from last year. I'm just kind of curious if he can put it together for a full season. Like what we saw 2 years ago, 28 points in 67 games when it was his second year in North America. If that's the baseline, I definitely think he can surpass that. And what the model's saying is he will, but ultimately it's up to him to, put it together on the ice.
If you're getting 44 points out of Berggren this season, I think you feel really good about that. I think you move forward with that. That's really good, especially if that is him playing in that specialist line role for the majority of the season. That's about it. That's best case scenario, honestly, in my opinion.
Now, Lucas Raymond, on the other hand, if he scores 44 points, we're going to be a little upset.
For sure.
But no, another one of Detroit's signings, Lucas Raymond, 8 years, $8.075 million. Happy to say that I was very close with my contract projection model that had 8 years, $8.125 million, off by $50,000 for the AAV. Yeah, I don't really celebrate my wins very often, but I'm going to call that one a win, just being off by just the slimmest of margins there. So I will take the credit on that. But yeah, I think that's a great deal for Lucas Raymond. I know a lot of people saw that that Seth Jarvis would be a good comparable for him, and I think we've talked about that previously on the show. Ultimately, he got a little bit more, but what I find kind of interesting about this contract, there's no signing bonuses, there's no salary ramping up and then coming down at the end. It's straight $8.075 million for all 8 years. Very predictable, very easy to manage on the Red Wings side. It's nice to see that, he got the long-term deal that he was looking for, that the Red Wings and Lucas Raymond's representation were able to come to terms on that. And now he's the 44th highest paid forward in the NHL in terms of cap hit for next season. So well-deserved there. I don't know. Devin, what are your thoughts?
I'm very pleased, honestly. Anybody who watched this team, especially down the stretch last season, knows that Lucas Raymond looked like a completely different player when the chips were down and the Red Wings needed to win games and get points. He looked like the player that they picked they hoped he would be when they picked him 4th overall back in 2020. And I think that this contract just kind of that's what it says, is he's becoming the player that everybody hopes he would become. I am the max term on it. That's fantastic. That's what you kind of hope for. I know in the early parts of summer when, there was all this talk about maybe them going after Steven Stamkos or Jacob Trouba, all this stuff out there. I was thinking maybe Raymond and Seider would both get bridged, and the fact that that was not the case, I have to imagine Hockeytown's very excited about that. And the thing with it too is that's a good contract today. Think about what that contract's going to look like 2 years from now, or in 4 years from now, and 6 years from now. That is it too crazy of me to suggest that he's getting paid like a first liner right now, but in 4 years that $8 million might be like the going rate for a second liner. And if Raymond continues on the trajectory he's on, he's going to be a first line player. So I have really no qualms with this deal. He gets to stay in Detroit. Detroit gets to keep him. I think he's a player that more and more people find themselves gravitating to because of how he played down the stretch specifically, but also he's kind of got a little bit of a moxie to him, and he kind of represents. He's one of those guys that represents Yzerman's rebuild, and to see him come into his own last season is kind of one of those things that gives you that little bit of hope that this rebuild is heading in the right direction, even though it feels like it's moving along at a snail's pace. Evan, I don't know. I know. I'm sure it's another one of those classic situations where Tony and I didn't leave a whole lot in the bone for you, but I don't know. How are you feeling about this? Were you jumping for joy when you saw Raymond's deal?
Oh, dude, I was doing the Macarena, man. It was finally great to get that Twitter update that crosses your phone to see this. For me, it was always a formality, but it's good to finally have it in place. And now with Mo coming over too, which we'll get to in a minute, I think everyone in Red Wings land feels pretty solid heading into the season. We talk a lot about, and this is something I've always had an issue with, and I've mentioned it to you guys before, when people talk about the Red Wings rebuild and the Red Wings not having lottery luck. Well, I think the Red Wings got pretty lucky with Raymond at 4 in that draft in the year he came out with. Right now, between Lafreniere, Byfield, Stützle, and Raymond at 4, I'm not sure. It would be hard for
right.
Top 3
what's that?
Draft class. That's all.
Top 3 for sure.
Right there.
Yeah, we say lottery luck. Well, you know what? We got lucky. He fell to 4. And we'll say the same thing about Moritz Seider at 6. So I never fall for that. While other people say it, I don't never fall for the lottery luck thing for the Red Wings. But I'm very happy for Lucas Raymond. I'm calling 35 plus goals right now. I'll clip this and you guys can rip me later. But I'm pretty confident that this guy he's got the ability to be a natural goal scorer in this league. And what he did the last month of the season to keep the Red Wings season alive was magical. I can't remember a time in the last 10 to 15 years where we've seen that last just amazing run that the Red Wings went on at the end, and those goals that he provided, the excitement and the LCA rocking, it was a big part. And again, I'm a huge fan of this kid. I like his temperament. I like his attitude. I like his work ethic. He's got a lot of room to grow. He's still a kid. And as you said, after you took all the meat off the bone for me, this contract is gonna look good. And I do agree with you in that a few years that might be the going rate for a second line center as the salary cap goes up. So very happy. I haven't seen anyone on Twitter who's not happy. So this is a great deal, and Red Wings fans can rejoice that the 2 pillars are locked down for this organization for the foreseeable future. So with that, let's move on to Big Mo, guys. Tony, again, contract Nostradamus over there, or is that what we're going to call you now? That's let's hear how close you were on the Mo one, Tony. Let's hear it. Come on, man.
Yeah, my model had 8 years at $8.5 million per year, and it turned into 7 years at 8.55. So again, I was shocked that it was that close. It was that accurate. I'm happy that it worked, and I'm happy that my hard work paid off. But damn, I felt lucky. But yeah, 8.55 million for Moritz Seider over the next 7 years. Like Lucas Raymond, no signing bonuses, no salary escalation, just 8.55 million per season. A little bit more than Owen Power, who got 7 years and 8.35 million, and Jake Sanderson, who got an 8-year deal for 8.05 million with the Senators. And honestly, seeing how Seider compared to those 2 players, both Sanderson and Power, in terms of production and the post entry level contract that they signed, it's really great to see that Moritz Seider has separated himself from the pack a little bit. Now, I know there's been plenty of discourse about his underlying numbers, which frankly is more of a product of his deployment in the Red Wings than the actual player himself. We don't need to get too deep into that, but this is another case just like Raymond, where if you look at the 2019 draft class, it was a shock when the Red Wings picked Seider 6 overall. But now, looking at it 5 years later, he's a top 3 pick in the draft class. He is a lottery pick. The Red Wings didn't win any lottery picks during their rebuild, but they got 2 lottery players in Seider and Raymond, and that's exactly what you want to see for a rebuild.
Moritz Seider, you can look at it in so many ways. To me, Moritz Seider is a unicorn. He is a unicorn in this league. Here's a list of the players. Here's the names of the players who had 200 hits and 200 blocks in a season since 2010. There's one, and it's Big Mo. So, you can say I'm biased, but I honestly don't feel like that in this instance, where we see a player like Moritz Seider. There's not a GM in this league who wouldn't, jump over whatever to attain this guy's services. I think he is a stud. I think with his age, his size, his deployment, his game's only going up. It's only getting better. And I think it's a great deal. I think we can say the same thing that we said about Lucas Raymond. This deal's going to look great in a few years. Big Mo's here to stay. He's a fan favorite. He brings the toughness, the grit on the end. He loves to get under people's skins. Those players don't grow on trees. And Seider is arguably one of the most important players for the Red Wings. He's probably the most important Red Wings player for the next 10 years. Love the kid's game, and very excited that Stevie got to wrap him up, because players, like I said, they don't come around often like him. And we saw, I think some people don't look at the numbers. They look at the numbers, but don't look at the deployment and the minutes that this guy puts up and the hard minutes that he takes on a daily basis, on a game-to-game basis. And this guy's legit, man. And this is something that is going to be a big part of the Red Wings organization for a long time.
So, Evan, I want to put you on the spot real quick.
Boom.
Don't be too scared. Do you think Moritz Seider is a future captain?
That's an interesting question. That really is. I could see that. I could see that happening. I think we're still a ways away from that. I think Dylan Larkin's still got a few years, but I think one day, I mean, maybe that's, you think about the transition from Yzerman to Lidstrom, and maybe that's the transition with when Larkin to Seider, when Larkin skates him up or hangs him up down the road. But yeah, I mean, Seider, he's a menace on the ice, and he's a respectable player. He's a leader. I'd have no problem down the road. That's the guy they chose to go to. And heck, maybe it's him and Raymond leading this team. They're the two franchise pillars. That could be the two guys that, captain and alternate captain, that we'll see for this team. But I can't say enough good things about Mo. He's one of my favorite players to watch, and I'm just very happy that this deal is finally done, and now we can start focusing on training camp and the training camp battles that are about to be upon us.
Tony, I actually have a two-parter. I want to pick your brain on. One is, again, your model. You had an 8-year deal. What are your thoughts on the fact that it did come in at a 7-year deal? And then the second part of it is, what do you think he needs to do to kind of take the next step? And I guess to preface that, or to kind of elaborate on that question, for me, I want to see him, and this will probably come with deployment, more favorable deployment. But I want to see him add a bit more offense to his game. I think his offensive game has really stagnated over the last couple of seasons. And it's probably because he's spending so much time covering for everybody in the defensive zone that he can't really focus on offense. I'd like to see him kind of establish himself as like a legitimate, like premier two-way defenseman that rocks you in the defensive zone, and also is a threat with the puck on his stick in the offensive zone. So I guess with that being said, what are your thoughts on my two-parter there?
I mean, in terms of establishing himself further, you're right. The offensive side needs to be a little bit more apparent. I have him scoring 50 points this coming season, 8 goals, 42 assists. The thing that I see it just being a little bit of a difference this year versus last year is there was probably going to be some more time to quarterback the top power play unit. Shane Gostisbehere is not here, and Eric Gustafsson is the main competition for that role. Like Seider and Gustafsson will probably be the two quarterbacks for the two power play units. So that's going to help with the offensive numbers a little bit. But yeah, at 5-on-5, it would be nice to see him get some more favorable deployments. But that also means another defensive pair stepping up and being able to be trusted with some hard minutes. Hopefully that's Simon Edmondson and I guess Jeff Petrie as the second pair. And hopefully Edmondson proves he's ready for a little bit more strenuous activity on the blue line there. But as far as the 7-year deal versus 8-year deal go, I really do think that the contract Brock Faber signed, I really think that influenced the negotiations, because before that, the two comparables were Power and Sanderson, and yeah, Power signed for 7 years, but when I saw that Faber signed for 8 years, 8.5 million. I knew at that point, like that's exactly what I predicted for Seider. It would just be a little bit different because, well, Brock Faber is an outstanding player in his own right. I do think that Seider is a more well-rounded, better defenseman than him. And so that's where I think the shorter contract came into play at the little bit higher cap hit. I was running some numbers this afternoon just to kind of see what it would have looked like with an 8-year deal, and just bear with me. There's a lot of math, a lot of explanation that goes into this that I feel is valuable context. But just to lay it all out, the salary cap for this season for the NHL is $88 million per team. Next year, it's going to jump to about $93 million. And then thereafter, well, actually after that, the CBA expires and that whole negotiation, new TV deal, it could go up significantly. But a conservative estimate would be 5% increase in the salary cap per year thereafter. So that means by the time we hit the last year on Seider's contract, the 7th year, which is the 2030-31 season, we could be looking at a salary cap that's about $119 million. So, and then the year after that would be 125 million. All right. So we've established that, right? So this year, $88 million salary cap, Seider's $8.55 million cap hit represents 9.72% of that amount. As the salary cap grows and Seider's salary stays the same, that percentage is going to drop over time. But if we had an 8th year onto it and use the same 9.72 million or 9.72% of the cap figure that we're using on year 1 and use that for year 8, for a cap that's 125 million, he's looking at just over $12 million in salary just based on that equation. And if you add that on, let's just say he makes 8.5 million for the first 7 years and 12 million for the 8th year, that's almost $9 million. That's more than Dylan Larkin makes in terms of cap hit. That's more than the Red Wings internal cap that they have. I don't know if contract be laid out like that, but just using that as a baseline, if you're paying Seider his fair share of $125 million of the budget, you're going to make that cap hit number for the entire contract a lot higher than it is now. So it's not the end of the world that there wasn't an 8th year on it. And I think it goes back to something, Devin, you said on a previous episode about you're negotiating Raymond and Seider on separate summers next time around. But if they went the 8th year and looking at how the salary cap was going to continually grow over time, it just wouldn't have made sense financially and made sense with their internal cap. So not the end of the world, but yeah, it's still a long-term deal.
And I'm glad you brought up my point about Raymond and Seider being staggered now, because while Seider got a 7-year deal and he now is up before Raymond, he is now up the same summer as Dylan Larkin. So they're avoiding the Raymond Seider thing, but now they're going to have to figure out Larkin and Seider in the same summer. But that is going to be a drastically different situation than it would have been if it was Seider and Raymond at the same time. Larkin's going to be in the back 9 of his career, like he's going to be deep into it, and Seider's going to be kind of looking for his last big cash out. So it's not as strenuous of a situation. And I also think that's important because Larkin's cap hit of 8.7 million was kind of the do not cross number that the Red Wings had internally. They do not want anybody making more than the captain. So when Larkin and Seider are up in the same summer, that gives Detroit the opportunity to kind of reconfigure their cap structure. I think based off of the things I just said, then you'll have Seider in a position where he can set that new benchmark, that new high point that nobody else can cross. And maybe that's the point where we are talking about that Yzerman to Lidstrom thing that you mentioned, Evan. Because at that point, it makes sense that Larkin is the standard or the do not cross point right now. He's the captain. So 7 years from now, is Seider the captain? Is Seider the most important? I mean, he might be the most important player already, but he's going to be even more kind of recognized as like the guy, basically. And he will be more fitting to be that bar setter, so to speak, if the Red Wings are going to continue conducting their business that way. And for what it's worth, because I have seen quite a few takes on that, I understand, and it is very pro player to kind of just ignore what anybody else is making and just give a player what they deserve and what they are worth. But I also think that there is some credibility to the idea of, this is your best player, this is your captain. If anyone's making the most on the team, it should be them. And it helps keep things kind of. I think it helped Steve Yzerman in his negotiations. He had a number he knew he didn't want to cross, and it wasn't a number that was like crazy to make as like a do not cross number. It was at 8.7 million is a good number. So I think that while they will have two important negotiations to work on 7 years from now, they've set themselves up really nicely to kind of configure what their salary cap's going to look like 7 years down the road when they do have all that extra cap space to play with that you mentioned, Tony.
Let me ask you something though. Do you think Seider could be the first Red Wings player to jump past that $8.7 million like internal ceiling, or do you think there might be someone who comes along, between now and then who grabs a higher salary?
That's a really good question, and I think that is why I say, if they're going to continue to conduct their business like that, where they don't want anybody to make more than Larkin, I think that there will come a time where the Red Wings are going to be active in free agency, and they are going to be going after the big fish that's out there. And you're going to have to pay that big fish probably more than 8.7 million. And if it's not from a free agency trying to lure people to Detroit type of thing, like you painted out perfectly, the cap's only going to go up. And what is 6% of the cap right now is not going to be 6% of the cap later. So if, let's just say, Simon Edvinsson really blows up, coming off of his ELC, would it really shock anybody if he's making a little bit more than Moritz Seider? I do think that if it's not a free agent, it's going to be like an Edvinsson, someone who also plays a really high minute key role for the team. But yeah, I do see that pathway. I do see that possibility. And I honestly think it's kind of likely, just with how the salary cap continues to grow. But it's really going to come down to how much Detroit as an organization wants to dig their heels in with this internal thing about not having anyone make more than Larkin. Because that makes sense right now. But what makes sense today does not always make sense tomorrow, as we all know very well.
Yeah, I mean, and we forgot to mention this kid is only 23 years old. There is so much room for him to grow, and I'm just very excited that it's going to be in the wing wheel uniform. Couldn't be more excited for camp to watch these kids battle it out. But we got to get to our guest, guys, and this is a guy I know we teased last week, but it's a guy that I've known for a long time. You guys we all know him as well, George Malik from the Malik Report, and he also works with Kukla's Corner. He's been a guy that I've been in contact with for probably over close to a decade now. Probably one of the first guys I followed on Red Wings social media. He's the OG of Red Wings bloggers, as you call them. So George was kind enough to sit down with us and kind of take a look at some of the guys in training camps that we were interested. We're going to talk to George about the goaltending situation, and we also kind of want to talk to him about some training camp battles that we've been talking about. George has a keen eye and a sense for that, and really excited, and I hope you enjoy our interview with George Malik. Well, we're very excited to bring on this guest, and I've been waiting for this one for a while. He is one of my favorites. He is the OG of Red Wings blogger. In fact, I think he's one of the original Red Wings blogger. He's been doing this since 2006. I'm very happy to welcome George Malik from the Malik Report. George, I cannot thank you enough for being here. I know this is the busiest time of the year for you. Again, it's great to have you on here to get some of your insights. You're someone I've always respected in this industry. I know you're very busy, so I want to get right into it. I wanted to talk about the prospects games from last week, and then what were the biggest things, your biggest takeaways from the sweep of the Dallas Stars and the 5-1 victory and the 3-2 win they had last Saturday and Sunday.
Well, to some extent, it's only 2 games, and the old prospect tournament was fantastic in that you got 4 games to assess the prospects, but there are still some takeaways to be made. Obviously some of the older players were the ones that led the way, and Hunter Johannes. Let's see here. Jacob Bryklovsky was very good coming over from the Czech League. I liked how he moved the puck in tight. He had both a good shot and a good passing skills, and he didn't shy away from the physical stuff either, which was good to see. Hunter Johannes, he's 26, so you expect him to dominate in a tournament like that, and he was big, heavy, and nasty and effective. Same with Gabriel Seider and Carson Bantle, the other guys that the Griffins signed to sort of ride shotgun this year. I was, obviously the names that stick out as we talked about are Doucette, Alexander Doucette, Amadeus Lombardi, Emmett Finney, and Nate Danielson up front. Shai Buium on defense was. He was the only player drafted that the Red Wings brought. Otherwise, they brought some tryouts, and the tryouts were okay. They were pretty good, all things considered. In net, I really liked Carter Galander. I thought that he was very patient. And while I think there are going to be some hiccups in terms of his adjustment to the professional hockey pace, I think that the Griffins are going to have a 3-headed goalie monster as well as the Red Wings. So it's kind of interesting to see the prospect games they're not training camp, but they're a really good runway with which to bring the prospects some forward momentum going into main camp. And they really do start to establish a pecking order for the prospects to be recalled and to find their spots in Grand Rapids and sometimes Toledo.
I know that many of us are very excited about the arrival of Nate Danielson. We're probably starting the season off in the AHL with the Griffins. What did you see out of him from this prospects tournament?
I was really impressed with his two-way game. Obviously he didn't dominate in terms of scoring. I'm looking at the stats here. Danielson, 1 assist, 6 shots, in 2 games, where some guys had 3 and 4 points. But he had a slow first game in terms of his offense, but he's feisty. And I don't mean that in a way where he's going to beat the snot out of people, but he's got an edge to him. He's very competitive. He's obviously got a ton of confidence in himself, and you combine that with his skating, his shooting and passing, his playmaking game, and his face-off abilities, and just his tenacity. I think he's a really interesting all-around player. When they talk about filling that number 2 center role, you look at him and you see how responsible he is at both ends of the ice, and how competitive he is, and that's a very encouraging thing to see.
In your opinion, will he start out the season in Grand Rapids?
I think so. I mean, I think the Red Wings really have to sort out their goaltending. That has to be their priority for the first, 10 games, 15 games of the season. But he's going to push for a spot, as is Carter Mazur, as is Marco Kasper, to some extent. I think that these guys all want to be, they don't necessarily think that they're going to make the roster out of camp, but they want to be the first guy that's called up, and you've got a competitive physical guy in Carter Mazer. You've got Danielson, who is this all-round player, again, who has, so much confidence. It's bordering on healthy arrogance, and which is a good thing. You need to be a little arrogant to be a pro hockey player. And then you've got Casper, who's so defensively responsible. They provide three different, I guess you'd call it three different flavors of players. But yeah, I think for the first part of the season, it's going to be 12, 8, and 3. 12 forwards, 8 defensemen, 3 goaltenders. I don't know how long that's going to last. Obviously, as a couple people have said, Yzerman is not hesitant to waive players if he feels that there's room for somebody to steal a job. And I wouldn't be surprised to see one of the goaltenders waived or one of the defensemen waived at some point.
It's interesting. Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about the Red Wings first round draft pick from this past year, Michael Branzig-Nygaard. He looks like a big boy, and he looks like he's closer to the NHL than a lot of the other prospects, I think, coming up in the next few years. What were your thoughts on his game during the weekend?
He's not overly big. He's 6'1". I think he's 205. In an age when your power forwards are 6'3", 6'4", you think that somebody who's 6'1" is almost of average to below average size. But boy, he's got a lower center of gravity. He can knock people over. He's just got this fantastic shot. He's able to get it off in traffic. I think if people look on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, John Keating has from Bally Sports Detroit. I almost said Fox Sports Detroit. Has a great clip of Branzig-Nygaard getting loose in front of the net and just sort of waiting in a dead zone. Kind of like Brett Hull used to do. I'm not saying he's going to be the next Brett Hull, but you really see these attributes of a power forward, and you see somebody who is going to at least make the Red Wings think about bringing him to Grand Rapids. I don't think that's actually going to happen because he, in the Swedish papers all summer long, Branzig-Nygaard said, I want to play with Skellefteå. I want to play with Skellefteå. I want to play with Axel Sandin-Pellikka. But he's given everybody something to think about, and he's been incredibly encouraging. For somebody who the Red Wings fans were like, why didn't they get Cole Yzerman? Why didn't they trade up and get Aziv Buyem, for example? And instead, the Red Wings appear to have gotten themselves a bit of a steal, and that's exciting.
I attended the draft this past season in Las Vegas, and I will readily admit that I was one of those people who was screaming for Cole Yzerman, a goal scorer. Yeah. Well, I'm glad we agree on something. I'm pretty impressed with what I've seen from Nygaard since that time. I think this guy is a bull in a china shop. As you mentioned, his great shot, and I want to get your thoughts on what his timeline is to the NHL, and where do you think he would slot in?
His timeline to the NHL is still probably 2-3 years. I think that he's going to need a full year in Grand Rapids. I think that most of the Swedish guys do, because he was playing in the Hockey Allsvenskan, which is the second league, second division. And I've been told by a lot of my Swedish friends that it's not that different from the SHL, which is the top league in Sweden, but it's still the Swedish AHL to some extent. So you want him to get some time with the SHL, playing, Skellefteå is the defending champion. So that team is going to have a lot of, chutzpah and depth. So he's going to have to battle for a spot there. But then I think you bring him over to the AHL for at least half a season to a season, and then you see what he can do sort of in a middle six role on the third line. And you don't want to give him too much pressure, but you want him in the top 9. You don't want him on the fourth line.
Right. A couple of earlier or later round prospects that I would like to get to too, and I want to get your observations on them. I want to start with Emmett Finney. I know he was a seventh round pick and somebody that's he's kind of becoming like a cult fan favorite that people are talking about. And I was curious your thoughts on what you saw from him.
He's got a real drive train, as they say. I think he was somebody who, when he was drafted by the Kamloops Blazers, was something like 5'7". When the Red Wings drafted him, he was like 5'10", and now let me take a look at here. Finney, 6'1", 183 pounds. So he's grown quite a bit into a man's body, and he's just ultra competitive, very reliable defensively, speedy. He does have a good set of hands, but to me, he reminds me a lot of Red Savage, who's playing at Michigan State. Somebody who is going to try and is going to be used to win defensive faceoffs at the end of the game when you're down by a goal or you're tied, or you're holding a 1-goal lead. He's going to be somebody who has that drive train where he wants to win absolutely every battle for the puck. And as it's hard to predict his offensive ceiling at this point. Maybe he does have third line potential. Maybe he doesn't. But I could definitely see him and Savage being on a incredibly tenacious fourth line.
Two other prospects I wanted to talk about too that got some play and looked like they played well in the prospects game was Amadeus Lombardi and Alexander Doucette. I saw their name on the score sheet several times, and I was curious what you saw out of their games.
Well, they're both players that have an uphill battle. You look at Doucette. He had 3 goals and an assist in 4 games. 3 goals on 4 shots, no less. He's somebody who played very well for the Toledo Walleye last season, but he is absolutely bound and determined to not play in the ECHL anymore. He wants to get a jump in to make the Griffins and stay up there. I think that's very realistic for him because he was such a great scorer in junior, and the Red Wings, they tried him out in the AHL. He just wasn't quite ready. He went down to Toledo. He was a real good soldier, and after the Red Wings decided to put him down there, he really embraced his opportunity, and I think now it's time for him to make the next step. He really is a sniper. It's really interesting to watch him play because he's not overly big. But at the same time, he's somebody who is, I was talking with you about Rychlovsky, the Czech guy who came over in the Red Wings, brought him in as a free agent, as a goal scorer. Doucette has a similar skill set in terms of his ability to get loose in front of the net and jam home rebounds and tap passes into the goal. He's a real sniper. So he was really encouraging. Lombardi, he has not gained a ton of weight or size. He's still 5'11", 171, given that he was 5'10", 160 a year ago. He's always going to be somebody in a smaller body than the rest of his teammates, but it doesn't seem to matter, which is really encouraging. Because, again, he's one of those players who has that drive train, that ability to be, and the competitiveness within him to be this speedy center who will make great plays and distribute the puck appropriately, win battles against much bigger players, especially in the corners and along the boards. We talk about tenacity. He doesn't necessarily have the desire to get in scraps and beat people up, but he's another one of those players who just he can't be denied because he's so ultra competitive.
Yeah, I think players like Lombardi, people see the points and numbers that he put up in juniors, and they get all excited and stuff. But realistically, I'm wanted to ask your opinion. Do you think this guy is a future Red Wing? Do you think down the road that if he puts on the weight, puts in the work, that he could make this roster one day?
I wouldn't rule it out. I think that the odds are against him because he's a smaller player, and I think the odds are against him because the Red Wings are building such a deep pool of talent up front. You know, obviously their defense is going to be stacked for a long time, but they're starting to build that forward depth as well. But you never rule anybody out. You know, I was looking at a couple of prospect games and prospect tournament roster sheets from 5 and 10 years ago, and you know, sometimes there are only 2 or 3 players who end up in the NHL. Sometimes there are more. And I looked at a name like Justin Brazeau, who was on the 4th line for one of the Red Wings prospect tournaments, and yeah, he didn't make the Red Wings, but he's playing with the Boston Bruins right now, and he's a 3rd-line guy. So even if Lombardi doesn't end up as a Red Wing, you look at a player like that, and you look at his competitiveness, and you look at his skill set, and you say he's going to get a job somewhere. You know, I hate to make that kind of prognostication, but if he doesn't make the Red Wings, somebody is going to be interested in bringing him along.
I want to shift gears here real quick now because we're just into the start of training camp, and I know you've had some eyes on the first day, and I'm curious some of your takeaways from what you've seen yesterday. What's
like I said, I like that the lines are shaking out like everybody thought they would. You know, it just makes sense in terms of the forward lineup. You know, okay, we've got Larkin with Raymond and DeBrincat. You've got Tarasenko, Comfer, and Kane. On the 3rd line, they've brought together, they've reunited Rasmussen, Kopp, and Fisher. 4th line is going to be Berggren, Veleno, and Mott. And it just seems to fit. There's this, I don't want to use the word hierarchy, but the puzzle pieces come together in a very natural way. There's a top 6, there's a bottom 6, there's a middle 6, there's the 4th line of players who need to who are still playing on prove-it contracts, so to speak. But the offense is a little more balanced. And then you got the defensive pairs. Obviously, you're going to have Seider with Chirot. It looks like Edvinsson and Petrie are going to be together. And then it's Olimata and a combination of different players who could possibly make the roster, whether it's Justin Holl or Albert Johansson or, you know, obviously Eric Gustafsson is the favorite there because he's going to be they want him to run the power play. It looks like things are sorting out very well. And, you know, you see him skating. I heard a comment from Andrew Kopp, and it wasn't from the Detroit media. It was from the Traverse City 9 and 10 News, and I think then it was Fox 2's Jennifer Hammond, because they bring their TV crews up just for a couple of days to get some quips and quotes, and they will get the players do their availabilities on Zoom. But for the local TV camera crews, they'll pull some guys out of the locker room who don't take part in the Zooms, and Kopp was one of them. And he said that he thought that Thursday's practice was the hardest one he ever took part of. You know, and that's something you want to hear from somebody in their going into their 3rd training camp. That and that was a comment that Coach Lalonde made as well. Is that, you know, this year everybody feels like they sort of belong. They feel like that this year they need to be more competitive, and that this year is going to be about working on those defensive details as well as making up for the lost goal scoring in free agency. And you put it all together, and you've got a team that at least is going to be very competitive this upcoming season.
I want to circle back real quickly to Jonathan Berggren, as we've been talking about him a lot lately on our show, and he obviously just signed his new 1-year deal this past week. You mentioned that he's probably going to start the season on the fourth line. Do you think for a player who's a little more offensively talented, that could be a hindrance for him playing on the fourth line with players who probably aren't as skilled as he is?
I would say sure to start. Yeah. I definitely think that, passing to Tyler Mott is not passing to Vladimir Tarasenko by any stretch of the imagination. But the thing that I like about putting him with Veleno or Veleno, however he's pronouncing it this year, you get some skill there. You get and you get two players who really want to prove that they're not just fourth liners, that they've got a higher skill set. And to me, the bottom six when things are going at their best, the bottom six is sort of interchangeable. You end up with a third line that can be used as a fourth checking line, and you end up with a fourth line that you can kind of promote to the third line to provide a little more offense. And I do think that Berggren, I mean, he is so very determined to, as he said, not live in his car this upcoming season, not be driving I-96 all year long, that I think some good things are going to happen for him. You want somebody like Berggren who's just so even keeled and, polite and pleasant. Having a burr under his saddle, so to speak, is a good thing. I think it's a really good thing for him because it's going to spurn him to be a more competitive player.
What would be an ideal season for Jonathan Berggren in this Red Wings lineup?
To me, it's more about producing some points. Coach Lalonde has been saying that it's important for Berggren to be one of those players that assuages the losses of players like Sprong, and never mind Perron, Gustis Beer, etc. A good season for him is forcing his way up the lineup, and regardless of whether his status as to his playing partners changes or not, just to get more ice time, maybe to get some power play opportunities, and to really, work towards something like 15 goals, work to a 30-40 point season at least, to get to the point where the coach relies upon him in all situations. That's been the talk from both Yzerman and Lalonde, that they want him to be a good two-way player. And Yanni Burgers is never going to have a big edge to him, but at the same time, you want him to be competitive. You want him to win those battles along the boards and in the corners, and you want him to be defensively responsible in his own zone. So there's a lot that he can do to have a successful season. And if the offensive game doesn't necessarily come, if he's trusted in all situations, that's great. If the offensive comes, that's great. If he gets some power play time, that's great. If you get all three, super.
We briefly talked about Kasper, Mazur, and Danielson already, but I'm curious after the first 2 days of camp, how do they look against the big boys?
The things that I've heard about Mazur are incredibly positive because he's a skinny little dude. He's kind of got that Chris Chelios build. He's very wiry, for lack of a better term. He's never going to be 210 pounds, but he's apparently gotten a lot stronger over the summer. It looks like he's skating real well. He's chipping in some goals, and again, well, maybe not again. For the first time, I'll say this: training camp hinders a player like Mazur because he's a tenacious physical player, and you can only piss off your teammates so much in training camp. I think that the exhibition season, given his snarl, and that sort of competitive attitude of his, once he's able to hit people, and once he's able to be a real instigator and piss people off, I think that that's where he's really going to shine in the exhibition season. Again, Danielson, just tremendous all the way around, defensively, offensively, in terms of all sorts of situations, competitive as hell, confident in himself. Like I said, if there's a player that he reminds me of, if I were to give an NHL comparison, I'd say a Ryan Kessler type, somebody who can be a two-way center, second or third line guy, but somebody who also aggravates the heck out of his opponents without being overly physical. And then Casper, you look at him, whether it's second line or third line shutdown center. I read so many good things about him in the off season, training at home in Austria. His dad was a professional hockey player, and his dad happens to be his agent. So, sorry, that's my phone. It happens. But Casper is sort of this consummate professional in the way that he approaches the game. But there's a bit of the competitiveness that he has brings a bit of an edge to his game as well. Again, we're not talking about he's not going to knock somebody over on the sideboards and flip him like Vladimir Konstantinov used to do. But all of these guys are competitive. All of these guys are have a tiny bit, at least a tiny bit of an edge to them. They're all really defensively responsible. They're all good two-way players, and they all have the potential to at least be really good third-line players, if not become the next generation of the Red Wings' second line.
If you had to predict right now, who are we going to see first called up to the Red Wings this season due to injuries? Is there a chance we see Casper and Mazur get some significant games in this season with the team?
Mazur is the first because the Red Wings seem to think that he can be competitive and he can be useful playing in a bottom six role. Even on the fourth line, they can put him in. They can just plug him in. And wherever they plug him in, it's plug and play, to use the software term. He's going to fit that role and adapt to where he's at. And so Mazur is the most versatile of the three. I think that for Danielson or Casper, they're going to want to put him on the top 9, so to speak. But again, if they steal a job, it's entirely possible that the Red Wings make room for them. We're at the time of the season where, I hate to say it, but I've commented on the blog about this. The Red Wings play 8 exhibition games in 12 nights. And even when you've got 67, 68 players in training camp, there are going to be injuries with playing that many games in that short a period of time. It's something I really don't like. I think the Red Wings should go back down to 7 or 6, but it provides opportunities for these younger players to get into the lineup, to steal jobs, so to speak, and to make impressions, to change the pecking order in terms of their recalls.
Yeah, we did see that last season with Mazur getting injured in training camp. That kind of hindered his start last season. Switching gears really quick, we've got a crowded goalie room, George, and I'd love to hear your opinion on how the Red Wings plan to move forward with between Lyon, Husso, and Cam Talbot. What are your thoughts on those three and how how their roles will play out this season?
At this point, I think that the team seems to think that Cam Talbot is going to be the starter. Even though he's an older gentleman, 37. I'm 46 years old. He's not that old.
We're both 46, George. Come on, we're okay. We still look good.
Yeah, it's just middle-aged. It is what it is. But anyway, I kind of root for the older guys, but in any case, I think that the way that he played for during the first half of the season for the Kings, obviously the Kings being a tremendous defensive team, I look at him to be the starter coming in, and then it's up in the air. Is Husso healthy? If Husso is healthy at 29 and he can get some reps in, so to speak, he was a starter. He was a good starter at one point in his Red Wings career. And you look at Lyon, and there were times last season where Lyon was an absolute savior in the crease. And then there were the times down the stretch where the Red Wings had to turn to Reimer because Lyon was giving up goal after goal after goal. He's just kind of inconsistent to me. And, it's going to be up to him to shake that label. So to me, it's kind of, it's Talbot, Husso if he's healthy, Lyon. But obviously the exhibition season is going to change that. And the first 10 to 15 games, the Red Wings players, everybody on their media availability that has said our October is tough, that our first 10 to 15 games are going to be really difficult. And we want to get off to a strong start. So it's going to be kind of merciless. And that's a good thing. And when you've got three goalies that it's going to be adapt or die, so to speak.
Well, George, I cannot thank you enough for your great insight here, and I've probably taken up more time than I should have today. But I can listen to you all day talk Red Wings hockey. Let us know where we can find your work. I know the Malik Report, but here's your time to promote yourself. Where can we find all of your stuff? It's just themalikreport.com. And on Twitter, it's just George Malik. That's my last name. So those are the places that you can find me for now. I don't want to plug a podcast on a podcast, but we are seriously considering. Actually, it's ironic. My 82-year-old aunt that I take care of, the one with the 2 titanium hips, is the one who's saying to me, "You have to get a podcast. You have to get a podcast." So I might get one to just get her off my back. It might be me rambling for a half an hour or an hour or something, but it'd be fun. Obviously, being on your podcast is a real it's a privilege, and I'm very grateful for your time. And I hope that maybe you guys will have me back. Oh, 100%, George. We love having you on, and it's always a treat to hear your voice. That's going to do it for episode 3 of Flying Octopus. Please, if you can, follow us on Twitter at Flying Octopod, and also please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel at The Flying Octopod. You can also follow us each individually on Twitter at Tony Wolak, at Sabourin91, at Hockey with Devin. Again, thanks for listening, and we will be back next week. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Flying Octopus podcast. Follow us on YouTube at the Flying Octopus channel and Twitter at Flying Octopod.